Hey everyone, and welcome to the Rare Liquid podcast. Today I'm speaking with Victor, who was a Penn Undergrad and is a fellow Wharton MBA alumnus. Now we're going to be talking a lot about Tesla in this episode today, but beforehand he was a wireline field engineer at Schlumberger in Saudi Arabia before working in energy consulting at Power Advocate. Then he got to Tesla, where he worked as a manager in their global supply chain division. And so we're going to be focusing a lot primarily on Tesla throughout this interview. We're going to be talking about the culture, what day-to-day responsibilities were like, and etc. And I do have to let you guys know that there is a part of this interview, if you're watching on YouTube or via video, where I accidentally didn't have enough memory in the memory card. So part of it's not going to show. Just want to give you a heads up about that. But hope you enjoyed this interview because I think Tesla is a super interesting company. Obviously gets a lot of hype and a lot of coverage in the press. But I think just generally looking a little bit deeper into what actually it's like working at the company is really interesting. Now, before we get started, if you're watching this video via YouTube or watching this video on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, then you're going to notice this background's a bit different because I'm filming in Los Angeles instead of my apartment in Philadelphia, which is where I actually filmed the interview. So just wanted to give you a heads up about that. And then second, if you're watching this because you may also be interested in getting an MBA, you may have to take the GMAT exam if you don't take the GRE. And I wanted to let you guys know about today's sponsor for this episode, Target Test Prep, which I credit a lot for helping me get a 750 on the GMAT. Target Test Prep has been helping students crush the GMAT for 16 years and covers quant, verbal, and data insights for the new GMAT focus, with 52 rigorous chapters broken into over 1,500 lessons, over 4,000 realistic GMAT problems, over 1,300 instructor-led videos, 1,200 digital flashcards for studying on the go, and live online support from GMAT focus experts. Target Test Prep is also the only company on GMAT Club with a perfect 5-star rating, and they also have the highest score improvement guarantee of 130 points. You're able to personalize your study plan and practice tests for whatever works best for you. And so if you're interested, be sure to use my code rareliquid15 to get 15% off, and I'll leave information about everything I just discussed in this episode's description. All right, Victor, thanks so much for joining for this conversation, and was wondering if you could first start off by just giving us an overview of your background.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me on. I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, in the third largest city in North Carolina. It's at the time I was one of very few Asian people in my school, and my parents owned a Chinese buffet, so I grew up a lot around food, around restaurants. In high school, I got really fascinated by chemistry and math, partly because my high school chemistry teacher was a big inspiration for me. So I decided to go study chemical engineering and found my way to Penn, where I did a summer as a high schooler learning about biochemistry, chemical engineering, and then decided to reapply as an undergrad for my bachelor's degree. But then I quickly realized engineering was, maybe not the best fit for me. It's more math than actual science. And so I stuck with the program to build up the quantitative skills that I would want to use later on in my work life. And my first job out of college was working for Schlumberger in oil and gas. During that time, it was 2015, the oil prices tanked, and the only locations left were Saudi Arabia and the Middle East and Russia. So I took this as an opportunity to take an adventure, move overseas, worked there for about a year and a half, transitioned into energy consulting at Power Advocate, which was then bought by Wood Mackenzie, and then finished up my 4 or 5 years there before moving to Tesla and their supply chain organization. And then decided, supply chain is an interesting and very important aspect of a company, but I wanted to understand a company as a whole and how to run operations, how business cycles work. So I decided to come back for my MBA.
Got it. And so starting off with your time at Penn as an undergrad, at least for my experience, having friends who were in, you said you majored in engineering at Penn. My friends who are engineering at Berkeley, their classes were really hard. Were your classes also extremely tough?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
You get like a 40 and you're like, oh man, this is rough. But then you realize everyone else got like 30 to 50. So you're like, we're pretty good.
Exactly.
But it is a lot of pressure because you do put in a lot of effort. And I think the best way to think about it is it teaches you fundamental skills and how to think about problems. But if you are the type that constantly refers back to how to do a specific problem, you won't succeed. And I think that was a big learning for me during school, which has actually played a lot in my way of thinking when I go about work, when I go about talking to people, when I go about life. But if you were to ask me about mass balances or distillation columns, I probably couldn't tell you.
And how has your experience at engineering at Penn as an undergrad compare now to being like an MBA student here? I feel like they're probably very different worlds. Do you find yourself being very, very interested in learning in the classroom, or are you focused more on like the non-academic portion?
I think there's a huge difference in terms of how much people focus on school, and myself included. As an undergrad, you're working to make sure that you have a GPA that's respectable enough for a company to take a look at you and take a chance on you. Whereas now, I think there's more freedom and flexibility to look at what you can do with your career and take time to be introspective. And as the part of the school process, I am learning a lot, and I'm finding ways to look at the problems in my past work life and understand, this is how cash flow works. This is what interest rates do. This is what net present value means for this company. And this is why they're hiring or not hiring. So it is a very much more practical way of looking at school, which I appreciate a lot. And, I'm the type that does go to all of my classes. I take it as an opportunity to really reflect on how what I'm learning is going to impact me in my career, and how I'm going to use it later on. So I'd say, there is a balance you can choose between school, social, and recruiting in the MBA. And I think striking that balance is important early on. And, I learned to say no to things pretty early on, so that I could focus on what really matters to me. And that's not to say that leaning on one of the three pillars is bad, but it's kind of how you pick and choose how you go about the program.
Right. Totally can relate to you on a lot of the things you said there. I feel like MBA student has some kind of struggle with letting go of certain things throughout the experience, because you can't say yes to everything.
Right.
But after undergrad, you worked in Saudi Arabia for a year. And so can you tell me like what that experience was a bit like for you?
Yeah. There's two parts of it. One is the work part, where I was working in oil and gas. Then the second, probably more interesting one, is the cultural aspect. So I'll start with the first. Oil and gas, I was what we called a wireline engineer. Essentially, you go to a rig that's already drilling. They have drilled maybe 5,000, 10,000 feet into the ground. And now it's time to figure out what is down there. Is there oil down there? Is there fluid? So you take these tools known as wireline tools. They're maybe 8 feet long, 10 feet long, 12 feet long. They weigh 200, 400, 500 pounds. And they connect sort of like markers end to end, and they attach to a cable, a wire line. That wire line feeds into a computer system that can analyze the data based on the sensors on the tools. And those tools can tell you things like the porosity, the resistivity. You can take a look at the gamma rays and how much sandstone, limestone, shale is down there. You can use tools to figure out what types of fluid are down there. And these jobs, just to get a sense, they can be as little as like $50,000 for one job, or all the way up to like millions of dollars for a job. And the benefit of that is that you get to learn so much about the oil and gas industry very early on, because as the wireline engineer, you are the one running the operation. You are the one working with the operators, who tend to be 40, 50 years old. They're much older than you, but they report to you. And so if you can imagine myself, I had just graduated college. they bring you to a training program. After that, they send you to your location. So mine was Saudi Arabia. And you have to figure out, how do you work with people who have done this for so many years and are reporting to you, but you're just getting into it the first time. So they continue training you through what is called a green hat. So you're a green hat until you break out and become a full-fledged engineer. And that whole process takes about 6 months. From start of training school through like breakout, minimum would be 6 months. That's the fastest that you can do it. But then when you get on rigs, you have to figure out how to talk to the rig hands, how to talk to the foreman, how to work with your operators, how to put the tools together. If things break on site, you're the engineer who's in charge to figure it out. So that aspect of the job was always figuring out how to manage, how to troubleshoot, how to mitigate risks and make sure the job runs smoothly. It takes a huge toll on someone because as you go through the operation, you may run into a situation where you're awake for 24 hours, for 48 hours, for 72 hours at a time even. I knew guys who were just eating coffee grounds just to stay awake.
Dang.
Like we had packs of energy drinks always. To stay awake, we even had like these sunflower seeds that you would just like eat, because that's, if you're actively eating and using your hands and your teeth, like you just force yourself to stay awake.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot of tips on how to stay awake, but you know, it paid very well for someone out of college. You know, and you could make bonuses that would bring you up to, I think the first year, the maximum that I'd heard anyone make was $250,000.
Wow.
So you can make a lot of money in oil and gas, but that comes at a cost. I knew guys who were balding at the age of 26, who had these permanent eye bags, who didn't get a lot of time with their families, but you make that trade-off to, you know, have a livelihood that is better for yourself in the future or for your family in the future. So that's kind of how I think about the oil and gas industry and my role there. In Saudi, the cultural aspects were another layer of complexity. You have a country who is deeply religious, quite conservative. There are a lot of laws that are surrounded by the religious aspects of it. They have religious police. They have rules that when you are not a family member or not in a family, that you have to sit in what's called a single section. So when you're in a restaurant, single men without families are staying in one section that is curtained off from the family section. During my time there, I also was exposed to a lot of the constraints around women. So the most shocking part that I found was when I'm in a car, I look over to the other car next to me. There's a mother in the passenger seat, but the person driving is her son, who's 10 years old.
Oh, wow.
You can barely see over the dashboard because at the time women could not drive. That's changed, you know, since, but it's quite a cultural shock when you take a look at, you know, how things operate in the U.S. Versus over there in the Middle East. Like they were a completely dry country, no alcohol. There were no movie theaters. So in order to see the latest movie release, you'd have to drive over to Bahrain, which is across the bridge, and go to a movie theater. And so there are a lot of aspects around the culture that are a lot to unpack, but to just give you a sense of that, it's completely different from what we have in the West. It gave me a lot to think about for what we take for granted. You know, I don't regret going there. I would encourage a lot of people to go. And I know a lot of our classmates have recently gone on a Saudi trek. And it's great they got that exposure because it gives you a perspective of the world that's different from what you have in your day-to-day life. And I, you know, just extending beyond that, I think having people work overseas can also give you an opportunity to really reflect on what you have. Right. And what, you know, the world itself can offer. Yeah.
What did your mom say when you were like, yeah, I'm moving to Saudi Arabia?
So my parents were worried. My mom was actually the one who was more excited for me because she's the type who likes to brag. I got into Penn. I graduated second in my class in high school. Like, I'm working overseas in Saudi Arabia. She likes to tell the rest of the family about, these accomplishments. My dad is a little more quiet and reserved, and cares a lot about me and my brother. And so he was the most worried. I made an effort to always contact them, but sometimes when you're overseas in the desert on an oil rig, you don't have cell signal. I remember walking around in the sand just trying to find one bar of cell signal so that I could call my family, I could call my girlfriend, and a lot of times there would be weeks where I would have no cell signal on this rig. So I can count 2 or 3 times when my family thought I was dead, just because I didn't contact them for weeks.
Yeah, that's a little scary.
Yeah. So it increased their worry, and when I finally left, they were so relieved. But I appreciate them for allowing me to take on that opportunity, because I know a lot of parents probably would have said no.
Yeah. And was it always your plan to just be there for a short period of time and then leave? Or was it after a certain amount of time working there, you're like, let me find another job?
I think it was always a short-term thing. What accelerated the timeline for me, though, was seeing all these red flags come up. I saw guys who were just miserable, who were very jaded, who were just taking this because there were no better opportunities. But I saw myself also getting pigeonholed into a career in oil and gas that was very niche and over time would not be transferable, which is probably what will lead to our second set of questions. But in terms of my career at that point, I looked at it and said, I don't want to be just a guy who knows wireline in Saudi Arabia. I want to understand the energy industry as a whole and broaden my horizons beyond these like very technical skills, because once those skills go obsolete, then I become obsolete.
Right. So then you did make your way into energy consulting. And so did you find that job while you were in Saudi, or did you come to the US and then like find a job?
I found it while I was in Saudi, and it was nice because my former lab partner at Penn was working at Power Advocate, this energy consulting firm I'd ultimately end up at. And I was thinking of jobs that I would want to do. I knew consulting from Penn being a big feeder into consulting programs, that it's something that people do to get experience, to get exposure, to build skills. And so I knew I wasn't marketable enough, given engineering took a toll on my GPA. So I wanted to find specific consulting firms that I could add value to. So places that focus on the energy industry, that focus on operations. And I was just lucky enough that one of my friends from undergrad was working at this very exact fit. So I reached out to her, I sent her my resume, and she happened at the time to be the lead recruiter for Penn.
Oh, okay.
For my consulting
nice.
firm. So she was like, oh, I know you. This is great. I'll talk to people. And she got me set up with an interview. This firm was not the type to do casing, which was great for me because I had never done casing. So it was a lot of behavioral interview questions, thinking questions, like how do you think? There were some pseudo cases, but it wasn't like a total addressable market. It wasn't
Gotcha.
the McKinsey style cases. So I got lucky because I took a chance, or they took a chance on me to bring in someone who's never had any consulting experience, but just had energy experience and very little of it, a year of experience.
Yeah. And so when you were working in energy consulting, you said the interview process was a little bit different, but then the actual work you were doing, was it still kind of just consulting, but for energy clients?
It was consulting in a very operational, hands-on way. So you can think of McKinsey, Bain, BCG as the strategy and like talking to management and setting a plan. But for Power Advocate, it was focused on how do we execute cost savings and how do we work with our clients to make sure that they're procuring the things the right way. So energy consulting is kind of a misleading title. It's the official title, but we work specifically with supply chain teams at utility companies, oil and gas companies, midstream companies. And what we did was we took a look at what they spend their money on, who are the market players in the industry, and how do you optimize the costs so that you achieve scale, you achieve recurring savings, you achieve best-in-class contract terms. And this is bundled with a SaaS platform that Power Advocate had with trillions of dollars of proprietary like utility spend data and energy company spend data so that you can perform benchmarking, you can perform should cost analyses, you can perform a spend cube and figure out, at a very granular level what they're spending their money on so that you can provide them with insights. So the company as a whole was very, very different from a strategy or management consulting firm because my MD would say we are boots, not suits. So we would be the boots on the ground working hand in hand with the supply chain team and making sure that, we build up their skills while also delivering value in terms of cost savings and long-term benefits for the company.
Gotcha. I really like the concept you brought up of boots, not suits. And I wanted to also ask then, what were your main responsibilities when you were in that role? Because it sounds like a lot of like hands-on kind of practical type of projects that you worked on.
Yeah.
On a day-to-day basis, like were you mostly in PowerPoint and Excel or like what were you doing? And were you traveling a lot as well?
Yeah. So definitely a lot of PowerPoint, Excel, traveling every week, Monday through Thursday. I had 4 positions as I was going through Power Advocate. So the first was you start off as an associate. I spent about a year and a few months as an associate before being promoted to a manager. And then another year or so of that before being promoted to senior manager. And then maybe about 2 years of that before being promoted to director. So the titles are a little more inflated than a typical consulting firm. I think that didn't really have an impact because the way we positioned it to the clients was that associates would be the ones who did a lot of the Excel and analytical work. And you build up those skills, but you also put together the presentation. And maybe in your first few months, you're not presenting directly to the clients. But because we were so small and the teams that we deployed on sites were quite small, it was not sustainable to have a manager or a director constantly presenting. So you have this kind of like fire hose just like blasted at you of just learning all these consulting skills while building PowerPoint decks, while putting together analyses, while putting together a story, and learning how to be a consultant. And I think within 6 months, I figured out how to operate at a steady state. But those first few months were really challenging because the day-to-day looked like you would get up, you'd talk to your MD or your directors, you'd figure out your assignments, you'd build out the analyses, the PowerPoint decks, you'd deliver it to them by end of day. They would get you feedback. We would run through it a few times before the meeting, and then you'd rinse and repeat. So then once I got better at that, I started building out specific skills on, I got really good at Excel. I learned how to analyze spend data very well, how to pull together pivot tables. A lot of people didn't really teach me as I was coming up through Power Advocate how to like perform analyses specifically. A lot of it was Google. And so I got inspired to pull together a training and help other associates as they were onboarded to learn Excel. So I think the quantitative skills I built early on, and also by kind of like teaching myself how to teach others, really helped pay dividends later on, specifically with Excel. But then as you get more and more senior as a consultant, you start to interact with clients and begin figuring out what their actual core problems are, or maybe why a certain stakeholder is not willing to address the issues that you've presented, and figure out how to interact with them in a way that's not telling them how to do their job, but more about, here is some truths that we have from data. These are objective. This is, for example, what the industry is spending in this commodity area, or what the supplier is charging for this widget. And you are X% above that. So there is potential to save money here if you switch suppliers. So those are the types of conversations you'd have, but it became less of the analytical and more of the personal. So I think that's when you transition from the type of consultant who works on analytics to someone who is actually driving value through like these personal interactions and influence.
Mm-hmm. And you ended up working, I guess, in Power Advocate for 5 years or so.
Yeah.
What was one of like the biggest personal lessons you took away from that experience?
The biggest lesson that I had was that the data that you have or the information that you have is worthless if you can't tell the story in a compelling way that gets actions and results. So I learned a lot through just like running multiple types of pivot tables and graphs and things like that, maybe this is not an answer that the client wants. A lot of times you'll hear, as you present to more senior and senior clients, they have limited time to really digest information. So you really only have one shot and maybe a few minutes to try and convince them that, for example, we should go with the supplier. There's been a ton of work pulled into it and you could get really, really into the weeds, but this executive really only has a few minutes and they need to trust that their team has vetted this process. And in order to get the team to vet the process, you have to influence everyone from, the lowest level all the way up to that executive. Mm. So you have to understand how each of those levels perceives information and tailor your recommendation and your data based on who that person is. And you don't really become successful at that until you can think about how you live in that person's shoes. So that's one way of thinking about how to build up the skills in terms of learning what other people think and then applying that to your day-to-day role.
Mm. Yeah, managing upstream also, like upwards, is also like a big thing that I think a lot of our classmates are, especially around our age, are starting to do a bit more and more as well. And I think it's kind of not really something you think about when you're going from undergrad to your first job, managing upwards, but that is something that you definitely have to do more and more. And I wanted to next know, you, after working so many years in this field, in consulting and client services, like what made you want to make the switch into working at Tesla?
Yes, there's a couple reasons. The first was that utilities, while I enjoyed working with everyone in my utility clients, utilities are just simply slower. They are burdened by regulations. They're burdened by a lot of red tape. These are big companies that, they have a huge responsibility for the people that they serve. And so as a result, they have to slow down and really think and de-risk everything they can because everyone needs to have the lights on, right? So when you talk about procurement as a function, there are very few areas where you can really innovate. Procurement can largely be driven by volume, be driven by business needs, but you're not going to get into anything cutting edge at a utility. Maybe with the energy transition that's occurring right now, there is a lot more need to focus on technology where a lot of my procurement skill set has been concentrated. But I wanted to make a move because I wanted something that was more fast paced, that broadened my understanding of what you can and can't do with procurement. And that's when I found the opportunity at Tesla. I had, at the time, been promoted to director. I was looking at Power Advocate and I was becoming a subject matter expert in IT sourcing and procurement, but also corporate professional procurement. And, if you look at a balance sheet, it would be everything under SG&A expenses. So it was like finance, HR, legal, IT, professional services. It spanned everything that does not touch direct revenues. So it's what procurement people call indirect spend. And so I became this subject matter in indirect spend, which Tesla was in need of. They were hiring a global supply manager. This is the title that they had, but it's basically someone who controls a commodity of spend for the company and assists with putting in supplier contracts in place, sourcing deals for the company to use a certain product or service. And you leverage a lot of the skills I built up from Power Advocate, which is looking at spend data, optimizing how much you can spend on an item or a service, looking at market data, what things should cost, who the suppliers are out there, thinking about long-term strategies of if you put a 3-year versus 5-year contract in place, what are the implications there versus a 1-year? And so Tesla was a company that gave me the opportunity to do this at a much, much faster pace, and it really did. But when I was looking to transition, I definitely wanted to focus on what companies can give me the skills that would be desirable in the future. Where can I learn the fastest? And where can I have the most impact given the skills that I have already?
Gotcha. And you talk a lot about the pace you're looking for a faster pace. And I've actually read Elon's 2 past biographies.
Yeah.
And pace is something that always kind of comes up. Like he asks for things at unreasonable kind of timelines. And from what I've read, it's kind of like he expects everyone to work at the pace he does in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel that like directly, where either from Elon or from his, I don't know, directors or VPs that you worked with, where they set unreasonable deadlines?
I think for my role specifically, it was not unreasonable. There were definitely times when I would have a project that normally would take 4 or 5 months be asked to be turned around in a week. But you can definitely...
That sounds a little unreasonable.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it was feasible, and it really pushed the boundaries.
Yeah. And,
there's this story of Elon telling this engineer at SpaceX that he needed to get this part down to, 5% of what the actual cost was. And that engineer was like, this is impossible. But he demanded it. This is Elon. SpaceX has high visibility from Elon. And I think it is impressive how you can push the boundaries of what someone can do and what other people are willing to do, just based on, how high of a standard you have for excellence is. There are other gripes I have with how Elon manages people, but it is notable that he can push people and his companies to do things that are groundbreaking, just based on his expectations. Now, that aside, the expectations did absolutely come from the top. There would be times when I would work on multiple projects. The common phrase within our team was, you just got to pick your battles. Sometimes the battles have to wait for you because it's less of a priority, but oftentimes you would be working and all of a sudden you get a request from the VP of engineering, like Lars, hey, we need this right now. And you drop everything. And you can't plan for it. You just have to drop everything and focus on that, because leadership has this mandate, and it gets cascaded down the chain. And you work with these people to make sure that happens. Otherwise, you can wait on things that are less important. But if something is coming from someone that is very senior, you have to prioritize that. And other things you can prioritize are just other urgent aspects, like if a contract is expiring soon, or if there is a problem with one of your suppliers, or if there is, something that from regulations comes up and you just have to drop everything and say, okay, this waste management regulation has just come out. We need a supplier who can help us there. So it's a combination of leadership, but also just at the time Tesla was scaling so fast. We had just started opening up. Berlin, Giga Texas was opening up. Shanghai was scaling up. There was so many things going on. And as you scale a company, there are fewer and fewer ways to manage your time.
Right.
So yeah, that I would say was the driving force behind the leadership, putting pressure on the entire company to really build up the skills for the company to succeed.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about and follow up on and ask about the project you worked on, where you said it was usually normally it takes around 4 to 5, you say months?
Yeah.
But you did it in a week. Can you walk us through how you're able to do that?
It was so the specific project came from a VP who at the time, I had never really worked with. I worked with a lot of people on their team, but it became an urgent need for us to put this solution in place. And if we did not put the solution in place within a week, then it would expose the company to a lot of risks that obviously people did not want to manage later on. So this came to a point where I had the buy-in of everyone on our team. They were like, whatever you need, we will be there for you. And then I had the buy-in from my team, from my managers, who said, whatever you need, we'll give it to you. Because this is being asked by the VP, and we need to make sure all troops are rallying behind this. And I think if you have that capability, if you have that like army to rally, then you can get like anything done in any amount of time. And it required me to reach out to suppliers who, they've never done this type of work. There are multiple suppliers within the industry that can do this type of work, but what we're specifically asking to mitigate this risk was nothing they'd ever done. They'd had to build this solution from scratch. But you have the backing of a huge company like Tesla. They are willing to spend the money to put the solution for them in place. And I think when you have all of those forces pulling this together, it is much, much different than when you take 4 or 5 months to source a server solution for a utility, which that does take time. But for a company like Tesla, they needed it right then and there. And the benefit for me was that I got to do something that was so outside of my comfort zone and so new and so unique that, no other procurement person out there probably has done this. I think for their team, for this VP's team, they got kudos from their VP, but also made sure that they did not have to expose themselves to risks later on. And obviously for the supplier, no one had ever sourced something like this before. So it's kind of up to them to figure out the pricing. And so obviously that benefits them too. And we would negotiate it down as much as we can. But at some point, it became more of a matter of making sure the solution worked and got it done in time than it was to save, X dollars on the deal.
Got it. And you also mentioned that a lot of the decisions came from the top, and Elon is known for like just being very hands-on and walking the factories and stuff like that. I don't know, did you have any experiences like where you just bumped into him or like?
I had no direct experience with Elon. I know a lot of my colleagues had, who, you'd run into Elon at the bathroom. One of my friends was like, saw Elon come in. He was going out and he's like, oh, hey, Elon, great job on the earnings call. Yeah. But I would say that, there's some stories that I've had from colleagues and even just like through looking at emails itself, like Elon does have a very heavy hand in the day-to-day operations of the company. One story was that, when you're in procurement, you have purchase order approvers, and that can go up to a certain level based on how much money that purchase order is. If it's over $1 million, it goes to like a director or VP. If it's over $5 million, it goes up to a senior executive. And then if it's over X amount, it goes to Elon. And usually Elon is supposed to, like in most companies, only touch those very, very, very big spend items. There was a point in Tesla's life cycle where Elon was focused on every single purchase order. Like a $10 purchase order for like, I don't know, like home goods or something. Like he's like, why do we need this? You would get comments direct from Elon, like on your purchase order, and he would just reject it. And it's so funny because it's like, he has so much going on. Yeah. That why is he spending his time looking at like $100 for the company? And I think it speaks volumes to like what he prioritizes, like how he manages companies. Like he is deep in the weeds, and that may or may not be a good thing. There are other examples where he has like sent company-wide emails about specific operating processes. A funny one is when he sent an email company-wide that said like it's okay to listen to music while you're on the shop floor. And then the VP of EHS comes in and didn't reply directly, but said something around the OSHA regulations around wearing headphones or something. And then there was a follow-up email where Elon just said, if I'm wrong, tell me why I'm wrong. And it's oftentimes I am wrong, but like, if you can't do that, then, you're not going to be at this company anymore. So, if people read that as this was a direct response to that VP of EHS. And I just thought it was funny because like he is actually on the floor. He's probably listening to music. And now he's telling this person who's like, hey, OSHA said you can't do this, that he's like, no, I want to listen to music. Like I want my employees to listen to music. So those are just instances where
those are fascinating actually, because I do also remember reading about how he would come across these kind of regulations and rules.
Yeah.
And then he would just be like, why do we need to have these? And then he would kind of ask something like, who made this rule? Like, why is it needed? Or he had like a set number of questions to ask. And if there were no good responses to them, then you just kind of like don't listen to that rule anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's honestly a good way of like applying first principles thinking in a lot of ways. And you also kind of talked about how the culture being, or everyone knows Tesla's culture is like you work really, really hard. Mm-hmm. As you kind of also touched upon, there are times where you drop everything, you work on a project. It seems like very like startup-y type culture, even though it's such a large company now. And it's also known for a lot of people kind of burning out and leaving. And so I wanted to get your take on Tesla's culture in terms of, is it really a type of company that where if you're there and you love it and it's for you, it's almost like a cult, and then you can kind of maybe stay there for like ever if you really, really want to? Or do you find that a lot of people were turning over no matter like how much they kind of loved the company?
I think I don't have actual hard numbers on this to support, but just through anecdotes and my own experience, there are a lot of people who come into the company for different reasons. One is they are passionate about sustainability. Tesla's motto is accelerating the world's adoption of sustainable energy. And the second is people are big fans of doing really cool stuff. Tesla obviously does really, really fascinating things. And it's a company that you would want to have on your resume. A third is that people are Elon fanboys or fangirls. Like I think rallying behind a CEO is maybe one reason why you want to go to a company. That's maybe a smaller contingent, but I'd say for the most part, people come because they want to do cool things and they want to advance sustainability. And for me, I saw turnover as a function of maybe people were not cut out for the job, or maybe people did not want to do X number of hours, or maybe people were just not enjoying the type of environment that they were in that was driven by the management, who put a lot of pressure on their employees. So I think for me, I saw more retention than turnover, like intentional turnover or intentionally leaving the company. But then you would come into stories where people were let go involuntarily. And this, obviously happened a lot during COVID and afterwards, but there would be times when you would email someone one day and then you wait for a response and you ping them back the next day and they're just out of the system and you don't know why. So I think a lot of the involuntary turnover, was disruptive in a way that is, there were things happening, but it kind of gave you this perspective of like, this company doesn't really need one individual. Like it will continue running and it will be forced to continue running despite that person not being there. So that's like kind of humbling too, because the way that Tesla is operating is like they have to meet these targets and these goals, and you're either in or you're out.
Right. Yeah. I also heard, or I read upon the story of one of Elon's like assistants who was like a super large part of, I guess, like the office culture or something like that. And then she had a spat with Elon, and then basically he decided to let her go and see if he could do everything that she could do. And then he ended up doing all of it, and then ended up not like hiring her. But it seemed like she was someone a lot of people in the company liked. So
yeah,
kind of like what you were saying, it is, I think, humbling to know that, no matter how much I think I'm adding value, I guess sometimes to a certain company, like it can really run on its own without me. And I've also at my time at JPM, I've come across colleagues who really had almost like, I would call it huge egos and think like, if I were not here, then this wouldn't happen and this wouldn't happen. And then they eventually leave and it's like, everything's running smoothly. Yeah. I guess that's just how corporate life kind of is. But I also wanted to kind of ask, I kind of dug a little bit for the dirt on Tesla a little bit, but I also wanted to kind of get, what you really appreciated about your time working there. You did talk a little bit about how, you can at times like drop everything. You have like this army behind you. It seems like it kind of exciting to work on things. So what was your favorite part or like favorite thing about working at Tesla?
My favorite thing was absolutely doing things I never thought I would ever do. Going back to procurement, you can spend your entire career in procurement, buying widgets, buying servers, buying consulting services for companies. But, one example is my first project at Tesla was looking at humanoid robots. And this was before they announced the Tesla bot, which they would a few months later. But I had this feeling of like, I'm like an insider now. Like I am getting exposure to like this really cool, innovative product. And for those who don't know, the Tesla bot is positioned to be a humanoid robot. So something that looks like a human, but operates autonomously based on Tesla's, self-driving software. So the goal is for these humanoid robots to take over the mundane human tasks of like picking up boxes, moving tools, like, making the manufacturing process a lot more efficient. And this is like, the answer to why are we even looking at this? But so many people were behind this. They're the VPs of engineering, a lot of senior AI and machine learning people at the company. And they just brought this up to me as the procurement person because they needed support. They needed someone either as a consultant or a professor, like academia, to look at and help them build out this capability. And so I got to take a look at different companies out there. Their Boston Dynamics is obviously the biggest one, but there are other companies out there that have these capabilities of building out robotics, specifically that are human shaped, but also can operate on their own. And it's like, never in a million years would I ever think I would look into this, right? Never in a million years did I think I would like negotiate a contract with these guys who had spent decades of their life building out this proprietary software and system. And it's their life's work. They have so much passion behind it. Like they don't know how to really focus on margins or EBITDA or whatever. They're just like, we're here to build robots and advance the future of robotics. And so you are now negotiating with this giant company who wants your capabilities. And you have to figure out like the balance between like making sure that they want to work with Tesla. You don't want to strong arm them into a deal that is like unfavorable, but you also want to make sure that there is room for them to grow along with Tesla. So if you've taken the negotiation class at Wharton, you think about the win-wins, and you can be the type of negotiator that is a zero-sum game, like win-lose. But in this case, you are doing something unique and different. And it is beneficial to both parties for each to come to a good deal. And I'm losing sight of the question now.
No. It was basically your favorite thing about Tesla.
Oh, yeah. And that's one example of doing really, really cool things. And, there are others where you do a deal or you do a negotiation or you do something that benefits a stakeholder and they just are so appreciative because it takes the burden off their back. Procurement, you can have as a shared service, which is what Tesla had, or a lot of times someone in IT or finance or HR will try to do it on their own. But they have all this stuff going on in their day-to-day work life that prevents them from sourcing something in an optimal way. So being able to come in, digest this like problem that they have, what solution they want, and turning it around in a matter of like weeks or months and giving it to them, you get a lot of appreciation for that. So I think that was another benefit, is like, even though people are so stressed out at Tesla, they can take the time and reward people who are doing good work. And, this would go up to the managers. This would go across like other teams. And you start to build out a reputation that is like, this person is doing good work. And people then want to work for you or work with you. So that's how I got promoted pretty quickly early on, because I am just interacting with so many people and making sure I did good work for them, but they showed appreciation back to like me and my managers. It just like, it's a cycle that kind of makes things continuous, because it continues to motivate you to do good work for other people, and they're motivated to continue coming back to you. So I think that's a part of Tesla's culture that maybe doesn't get a lot of attention. Because at the end of the day, you are trying to do a lot of impossible tasks, and you can't do it alone. So you have to make sure you have the right people on your side.
Hey guys, hope you're enjoying this video so far, and sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to let you guys know that I recently launched a how to get into MBA course called liquidMBA in case you're interested in breaking into a top MBA program. The course provides access for all aspects of the MBA application process, access to a library of admitted essays, of which there are 10 per school, and super detailed school-specific advice covering things like student life, academics, clubs, resources, leadership opportunities, essays, and even 30 secrets for each MBA program. We have a 24-hour free trial, so you can check out the course for free, and also a no-risk money-back guarantee if you don't get into at least one MBA program. We also provide lifetime access to our Discord community, where you can connect with peers and get additional support from me and my team. Admissions consultants often charge $400 to $700 per hour, which is crazy to me. And so for the price of a 1-hour call with a consultant, you get everything I discussed and a whole lot more. So I really am trying to make liquidMBA a really good deal for you and a no-brainer. I've been spending a ton of time and energy pouring everything I possibly can into this course. I really think there's not going to be a better bang for your buck type resource if you're interested in an MBA program. And I'll leave a link to liquidMBA in this episode's description. You can check it out if you're interested. So it seems like a culture that really, while it can weed out the people who are not fit for the job, at the same time, if you really put your head down and work well with others, then it really rewards you at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is honestly a really good aspect of any good company.
Yeah.
And I also was thinking a little bit about what you said during your time at Power Advocate, where you were learning a lot of things on your own and then using a lot of Google and stuff like that. And I think about what you just told me you were kind of working on at Tesla, which is like negotiating with these big companies and things that maybe you might not have had a lot of experience with.
Yeah.
So was it a lot of similar, like, was it very similar at Tesla as well, where you were kind of teaching yourself a lot of things? And if so, what is like one thing that you had to teach yourself where you're like, wow, I can't believe I learned this that quickly and then actually executed?
Yeah. There's so many things that I learned through my time there. I think the biggest thing I picked up was that how to operate with 50% of the information you really need. And so because of that, you have to study up on these various industries like benefits. Benefits is an industry that is so vital to a company, especially a big company, that you can have a big influence on how much the company spends on benefits, but it's also taking a look at the cost structure within the industry, but what value it brings to a company. So Tesla is known to have extremely good benefits because they want to recruit the best engineers, the best talent, and in order to keep and retain them, they don't want them to worry about their health, how much they have to pay for healthcare. So you start to build out that expertise by just looking within these industries and like what the cost structure looks like, and then bringing it into what we call an RFP, request for proposal. But then you have to negotiate and be able to talk about, okay, this pricing that you have, it's too high because compared to other providers in this space, and based on your model, it's much higher than we anticipate. So we need you to come down to this level. But you can't do that negotiation until you understand that industry and how they are charging their prices, but also what what matters to them. Like in healthcare and benefits, it's the cost per employee per month. I knew just based on the trajectory of the headcount at Tesla that it was spiking rapidly. So that leaves a lot of negotiating power for a scaling company to talk to the benefits providers and say, hey, we're going to go from X to Y. It's going to be X% higher than we anticipate from the prior year. So you have to give us a better discount because we know that your cost structure is based on volume of employees and we're increasing volume rapidly. So as we grow, you grow. And that's like kind of the theme that came up with a lot of companies within indirect spend, such as like audits. You know, you're going to have to do a lot more auditing. There are a lot more regulations now with a company opening factories overseas. And within the US, there are a lot of, headwinds for companies trying to break into renewable energy. So you have to build up those capabilities and make sure that your service providers can offer you the right guidance, the right audits, the right material to present to regulators. And so this kind of like vacuum effect of pulling things into a large growing system contributes to like your learning because you have to figure out what is important for the company to do and what is important for those suppliers to do. And you do a lot of Googling, you do a lot of talking to people within the industry. I have mentors who have sourced many aspects of what I was doing that I would reach out to and just have a conversation about how do I do this? And you have to rely on other people and other sources of information that Google can't provide on its own.
So when you were working there, did you come back to home each day and you kind of lie on your couch like, oh man, that was tiring? Or were there chill days as well? That's when I envision Tesla and people working there, and people just like imagine people like running around all the time, like on the phone, like constantly hustling. Like, were there also like chill days too?
There were
like
chill days, but it was like when you had a chill day, you started to question yourself, like, am I like not doing enough? But I don't think it's all like hustle and grind. Like you can take vacations and I think an important learning too was that setting boundaries very clearly. Like I had this obligation at this time is really important because and being able to ignore all of the emails that come in. Like there was one point where I would get an email every minute, just not even like one of those administrative emails like, oh, your purchase order was approved or something. It was like actual emails from individuals in the company needing something. And I think being able to step back and breathe prevents that burnout faster because, if they really, really, really need something, they'll keep coming back to you. But it's up to you to figure out which battles you need to pick in order to make sure that things go according to plan and that your work is not disrupted. So that's a big aspect of it too. But I would say, there are days where you can just chill out based on your team. Maybe some teams, they don't ever chill, which is expected for Tesla. But for me, I did have time to breathe.
Gotcha. What were your hours like on a week-to-week basis? Like what was a good week, average week, and a really, really busy week?
A good week was 40 hours. That's probably the minimum that you would have to put in. And that's because, it was a little slower or that you had just completed something, a big project, and you could slow down. A busier week if you're working. So it was a global supply management organization. You have calls with Europe, you have calls with Asia, and you have supplier calls all throughout, the world. So there are times when you'd have to take a call at like 8 p.m. at night because Shanghai is trying to source something. And then there would be times where you have to be up like at 4 a.m. because Europe is awake. So those kind of like average hours are probably around like 50, 55. If you're doing something within procurement, like I'm sure average for engineers are much, much higher, right? But for a busy week, I don't think I worked more than 60 hours. It's not so burdensome that you can't like sign off at 6, 7 p.m. You just have to make sure you deal with it the following day and make sure you can manage your time well. But I would say like 40 to 60 hours is probably a good expectation.
Gotcha.
For Tesla.
And that's reasonable, I'd say. And would you say you had to work any weekends?
very few weekends. And that just could be because someone needed something by Monday. And I didn't have enough time during the week to complete it.
Got it. And when, when just like Apple, when they released their new products, it was kind of like they would have a show about it. And I think Tesla kind of started to do that as well. When those kind of events were happening, when you guys were launching new cars or something like that, what was the energy like in the office? There was a lot of buzz. I think there's usually a stable amount of buzz, but then when you have an announcement, like something new is coming out, like we had AI Day when I was in my first few months at Tesla. I think it was like in September, and there was all this buzz because we were like, no one knows what's happening, but I kind of knew. I was like, they're going to announce the Tesla bot because I was working on some initiatives behind it. But you talk to people in IT, it's like, oh, you're dialing in. You're like, yeah, I'm going to dial in. Like I'm going to like watch the whole thing. And even their annual reports or their quarterly reports, people would dial in and just be like fascinated by it. These like all hands meetings, like, and Elon or the VPs are talking about something specific at the company. Like people were so excited to just join because I think when someone announces that there's going to be this meeting or this like presentation or this unveiling, it's like you get to see the culmination of all the work that's being done at the company. And it becomes busy, but it's like it's a good busy because you're like, oh, we're working towards something. Like we're releasing a new product or we're releasing a new car. There's a lot of hype around the general public, but even within the company, it's like you get really excited by that. And what would you say was your proudest accomplishment during that time?
During my time at Tesla, the most proud I've been was when I got promoted. I had to present to the VP of supply chain, who reports directly to Elon. I think he was maybe 2 steps above my position in global supply management. And in order to get promoted, you have to obviously prove yourself, but then you have to prove yourself up the chain. So your manager, their manager, all the way up to the VP, at least for the position I was applying for. And in order to do that, you have to come with a compelling case for why you need to get promoted. Oftentimes, it is you need a bigger team to manage whatever you are doing. So in my specific case, I was managing way more than most global supplier managers could typically handle. So if you kind of imagine one manager can manage $100 million in spend, and I was 10x that, over 10x that. So if you could feasibly make the argument I was doing 5-10 people's worth of work, and it was not sustainable. And like I'm not saying this to brag, but it's like it is a very clear business case to make sure that if you are handling this much spend and you're only going to continue growing, you just need more people. It's just math. So that argument was the foundation for what I presented to the vice president. And it was a very clear argument because over time, in consulting, you got the exposure and experience from building analyses, from storytelling, from making compelling arguments that you can present in the matter of 15 minutes. Like I remember that presentation, it was just me and him. We were still remote at the time. So he dialed in, both of us were off camera, and I was waiting there for 15 minutes in a 30-minute meeting to see if he'd show up because he's a busy guy, right? And it's no fault on him if he doesn't show up. So I'm like, okay, if he doesn't show, he doesn't show. But he showed up, and in the limited time I had to give this presentation to him that I was planning on taking 30 minutes, but then you have to just sit back and say, okay, what does he really need to know? What can I do to make sure he understands the case here, to make sure that I get to build out this team? And so the proudest moment for me was when, after the end of the presentation, I asked him if he's asking questions throughout, but like you at the end are like, do you have any more questions? And he's like, nope. I talked to my manager a week later and she's like, how'd it go? And I was like, oh, I mean, I don't know, because he didn't have any more questions after that. He had no feedback. And she told me, well, he's the type of guy that, your first impression matters a lot. And if there's no feedback, that's good feedback.
Mm.
And then I find out later that, I got promoted. And, the official title came a little later, but in that moment, it was like, the culmination of my career being this like subject matter and indirect spend, presenting a case to the VP of supply chain and telling him, we need to build out this team because you're just continuing to grow and it's not sustainable. And he was like, yeah, you're right. And I got to get promoted and build out this team and help this company in a way that, if I were to ask myself when I was younger that this was something I'd be doing, I would say, you're out of your mind. That's reserved for someone way more impressive than me. But I think that's, looking back, I'd say that was my most proud accomplishment.
What do you think it was as you were working there that allowed you to, let's say, be in charge of spend 5 to 10x more than the average supply chain manager? Like, what you kind of talked about how maybe it was your experience in consulting that helped you, but do you have and I'm asking this on behalf of people listening where maybe they're working not just in tech, but a lot of different other industries as well.
Yeah.
What is it that you feel like you brought to the workplace that really helped you with this promotion and just like, excel at the job?
Yes. There's one skill where you do have to be quantitatively very, very good. You have to know your facts and your data like the back of your hand. And you need to know which of those matter the most to the people you're talking to currently so that they can put faith in you that what you're telling them is correct. And then the other aspect of it is knowing how to prioritize. So certain aspects of the work and certain people within the company just simply have more impact than others, and making sure that those needs are addressed first, because it is a requirement of the company. It is a requirement for those stakeholders. You build up this network of people who begin to trust you more. And it's hard to say this, but like some organizations, just their trust and influence is not as high as others. And I think, when you think about internal company politics and influence, those that just generally matter more for your own benefit come from those who are just doing more value driving work. And so if those people are coming over to your team and saying, this person is doing great, like Ben's doing great because he's helped me out in so many ways, that helps you drive more towards your career goals. And that could be promotions or managing people. And, I'd say the biggest aspect of it is knowing how to build trust with a network of people who can show appreciation and offer people within your management a sense of this person is trustworthy. And I think we focus a lot about networks in business school, but to me, I don't think a network is valuable unless you have the trust as well.
Right. Yeah. And I like what you said at the beginning about knowing the data, facts, and then also knowing which ones are important to and catering it to the person you're talking to. There's a lot of like layers to that.
It is.
Yeah. And I wanted to also ask, a lot of people want to work at Tesla. And so I wanted to ask about your recruiting process actually a bit.
Yeah.
How many steps were there and what kind of questions were asked? And, is Tesla known for asking any kind of like tricky behavioral type questions at all or anything? Or is it pretty standard stuff?
It will definitely depend on the team. One thing I noticed immediately after I got to Tesla was that the HR teams and the recruiting teams tailor the process to that individual organization and actually that individual team. Like within global supply management, our team, the indirect team, had its own process that was vastly different from like someone who is working on the solar procurement team, right? And I think you just can't control for that when you're recruiting for a place like Tesla. But my process was that I went to a recruiter and there was a behavioral fit interview process, kind of like the general recruiter, like first call interview. Then there was an interview with the hiring manager, my direct manager. She would go through the interview and behavioral questions like, We also had an Excel test. So that was part of the interview as well, where you just have to show, can you do the basic Excel work for a procurement professional? So that would be things like, understanding the spend, understanding the unit cost structures, understanding, where you could save money, how to like even convert between currencies. That was part of it as well. But after that, it goes to a super day. So it's 5 people on the team. It was unique for me because I interviewed with like 2 people in my position that I was applying to. My direct manager again, her manager, and then someone from the legal team, which I found interesting. And then I eventually became very, very good friends with this guy. But the legal team works hand in hand with procurement. So they do the contract terms and conditions negotiations, whereas procurement focuses on the commercials, like the pricing, the rebates, et cetera. But you have to work with the legal team and they have to work with you. So I found it interesting that they brought in this person because I'm like, oh, I guess I will have to work every day, every week with this person. So that was a curveball. But I think overall, it was more behavioral than super technical. I'd say like half of the interviews on the super day were business cases related to supply chain and procurement. It almost got so repetitive that I was like, didn't I just do this? But it's just like slightly different supplier or slightly different context. But I also had the chance to interview other people later on. So when I was building out my team, I was interviewing candidates. We tweaked the interview process a little bit too during that time because we had some do, we also had a presentation to give as well because we wanted to understand how candidates present. Like going back to can you present the right information? That matters a lot. So we tweaked it a little bit. And then, we had originally no scoring mechanism. It was based on like almost a thumbs up, thumbs down, how many people gave thumbs up. And then over time, it evolved into more of a objective criteria method. So, it's unique that this team has its own process, but I would say at least for other teams at Tesla, it may be much more rigorous or much less rigorous just based on that, that organization.
When you were recruiting or when you were recruiting other people, what were some of the challenging questions that might have been asked? Like maybe like what was a really tough question for you, or what, when you really wanted to pry at someone, like, what kind of questions would you ask?
So I would look through their resume, and procurement professionals will say like, I've helped source this commodity, this good, this service. And then I would really drill in and see if they understood the industry, because if you've spent time sourcing it and if you did it well, then you have to know who the industry players are. How are they charging their margins? How are they making a profit? How are they like negotiating with their clients? So putting them in the shoes of like, if you were to do my job today, would you do it similar to how I approach it? Or would you do it in a way that is rational and logical and driven by data? So I think the questions there would be like, okay, how does this company make money? And if they can't tell me from bottom up, okay, they source this material, they make this good, they charge cost plus, so it is like a certain margin, it could be in this range. If they can't tell me that, then I know they haven't really done their homework. And maybe they just went out and said, hey, we need this good. And then they get bids back. And then they're just like, okay, this looks good. So you can have this range of experience that is like very, very deep, and they understand the industry very well. And that's a person that we would hire. Or if they've simply just done the job because they checked the box, you can really suss that out pretty quickly.
Yeah, I like that example a lot because it's such a simple question, but I think like simple doesn't mean that it's easy.
Yeah.
And so you can get a ton of information from something like that. I can totally see a lot of people just being, caught by surprise by a question like that.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask about compensation during your time at Tesla. I guess for your position, and a range is fine. Like what did it look like in terms of like salary, bonus, and then stock-based comp, and was it like fairly regular where it's like every 6 months, every 1 year, then you can expect like, I don't know, like when to get your bonus, or how did compensation look like at Tesla?
So you'll have a base salary, and then you'll have an equity package that is split up between RSUs, stock units, and then restricted stock units, and then you have options. You can choose the allocation. So you can decide, I want 100% RSUs. That's the safe bet. You could say, I want 100% options because I'm very bullish on Tesla. That's the riskier bet. And you can land anywhere in the middle. For the most part, it's base salary and then equity. You get a raise every year. So it's, the annual cycle. And then you'll have certain percent raise based on your performance, your rating. And then you may have an additional equity package tied to it. So just quick comment on equity. It's a 4-year vesting. The first year, you get 25%. You have to stay the entire year. You get that first 25%. Then after the first year, it is every quarter, you get a quarter of that 25% that vest. So over time, you will just accumulate until you reach the 4-year mark, you're fully vested. But if you get an equity increase, then that timeline starts over for that chunk of equity. So say you had like, 100K worth of equity from the first time, you wait 4 years, that's fully vested. The second time they give you an additional 10K, that 10K starts over. So, maybe after year 1, then you have to wait till year 5 to fully vest that 10K. In terms of ranges, the salary range for a global supply manager, I would say, is roughly around, on the very low end, maybe 110, and on the very high end, maybe like 150, 160K. And then in terms of equity, that's a black box. I think a lot of times it comes down to the years of experience, specific value you can bring. It could be as high as 200K in terms of like equity that you can divide across RSUs or options. It could be even higher than that. Not many people I've talked to have disclosed that to me. But I would say, you should expect a good chunk of the compensation to be tied with equity with Tesla. That's how they motivate their employees. If the company does well, you do well. So Tesla's kind of known for having a lower base compensation relative to like Apple's global supply management organization or Netflix's. But they have a lot more in equity.
So we covered a lot about your time at Tesla, and Elon is kind of known for speaking publicly about how MBAs don't know anything and stuff like that. And it seemed like you were doing pretty well at Tesla. And so I'm wondering why you decided to leave such an exciting firm and company and then get your MBA.
The main reason was because I had spent so much time in supply chain procurement that I foresaw myself maybe continuing down this path at Tesla or other company, and ultimately ending up as someone like the very, very top would just be chief procurement officer or chief supply chain officer, or VP of supply chain. I could spend my career doing that, but I felt like I wanted more exposure to different types of organizations, different groups. Like ultimately, I thought, where would I want to end up in my career? And to me, it just landed on someone who drives values for companies. It could be like in an operating role. It could be as a senior executive. But in order to do that, I had to understand finance. I had to understand accounting, understand management principles, understand corporate strategy. Like those are things that you can't really fully understand from spending your entire career in one function. So instead of focusing vertically, I wanted to expand horizontally in terms of my skill sets. And that's where the MBA came in for me.
Given you wanted kind of more of like a well-rounded background, I guess, for the future, like what are your long-term, I guess, post immediate MBA goals, and then long term, like where do you see yourself at?
Yeah. Post MBA, I'm going back to consulting. I was fortunate that I found the firm Alex Partners, who focuses exactly on what I want to do. So operational consulting work, still like boots on the ground type work, and focused within the energy industry. So it's kind of like, it just checked all the boxes for me.
What made you want to go back into consulting?
I think when you go from consulting to industry, you spend a lot of mental bandwidth on improving processes that just can't be improved, just given the amount of resources and time you have. And so that aspect of like, I would kind of get a job done, a project done, but it was not like something that I had planned out myself or helped a team plan out for themselves. And I like the aspect of setting a vision, setting a goal and target, and rallying people to get that target or to meet that target. So I think consulting for me is like, it also gives me exposure to other operating organizations and how companies think. So that aspect to me was also like, let's get more exposure to that aspect of business and continue training myself to build those skills.
And then long term, do you see yourself maybe staying in consulting? You ever think you might go back into industry?
I go back and forth on this. I think depending on the experience within consulting and what I can do with it, I could see myself becoming a partner in consulting. I do enjoy, working with different clients, working with different problems, helping to mentor new people within companies, teaching them. Those are all like aspects of a career that I enjoy, but that comes at the trade-off, obviously, of travel and work-life balance. But I think if I were to think about when I have a family, when I have kids, when I want to reprioritize my life, I could go back into industry. And I've talked to a few people who have done that, and they've said those lifelong consultants who have said they went to industry for several years to focus on their family, they just went back to consulting afterwards. And I think that's kind of that constant drive of making sure you can get something done in a way that you envisioned it. And so it could go either way. I think I'm open to the opportunity for either.
Got it. And what was one thing about your MBA so far that has surprised you?
I think what has surprised me was how much I could learn from other people. Honestly, I would say you obviously learn a lot from your courses and your classes and your professors who are at Wharton, the top of their game. But the information flow from just talking to different people in various settings and learning about even just things like, how do you manage taxes for someone who is like starting their own company? Like, there are so many conversations about that happen outside the classroom. You obviously will have the conversations about travel, about courses, about where they end up after graduation, what companies are out there, what jobs are out there. But I think if you were to just drill down into like information that you can gather from people at Wharton, it is things like what are important within industries, what opportunities exist beyond like what you know. Even like conversations like we're having right now, like you get a chance to peel back the layers of this onion at Tesla, where you might not get that opportunity if you were not in a business school environment. And I've done this with a lot of classmates of mine who have like helped do their own startups, who have helped companies in private equity firms and banking firms to like understand various industries as well. And there's just so much information flow because you have so many different people from all these walks of life that can provide that to you.
Yeah, I'm certainly learning a lot more about procurement and Tesla than I ever did in my life. But yeah, thanks so much for sharing all the information. And I just have a few like fun little questions for you at the end. But one is, if you weren't doing the current work you're doing now, in an alternate universe, if you were to go back post-college, like what kind of work do you think you might be doing?
I had this dream, this retirement plan, which my fiance finds kind of silly, but it's it's opening up a coffee shop, or opening up, like, ultimately it would be a bed and breakfast on a coffee farm that I was inspired by just like my years of growing up around food and around flavors. And so I'm co-president of the coffee club at Wharton.
Oh, okay.
And I just like had this fascination with coffee after coming back from Saudi Arabia, where they mostly drink tea. There's like powdered Nescafe coffee, you know. But then I got back to the US, lived in San Francisco. There are so many specialty coffee shops. And as someone who enjoys those like nuances and flavors and everything, I really just opened up the world to like specialty coffee for me. And I think I would want to like have honed in on that. And like my old boss would tell me like, you should just open up a coffee shop, man. And I'm like, I'm too risk averse right now, and I don't want to waste investor money if I do it poorly. So I think in an alternate life, I would have been less risk averse and maybe, you know, gone through that.
I've heard coffee shop before from people, but not coffee farm. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Maybe one day though.
One day.
What about another question is, what is something that you've changed your mind about over the past 10 years, where previously you might have thought you believed in something like very strongly, but you've changed your mind about it?
I think the thing I've changed the most is how I come off to people. And this is like a fact of like just growing up as someone who didn't really prioritize like looks and or composure or how you talk to people and how they perceive you in the world. You know, as a teenager, you have like insecurities and maybe you're worried like you'll embarrass yourself. But like as you get older, it starts to turn into like, oh, the way I am like approaching people, the way I carry myself has a major impact on how they view me, especially in the workplace. In consulting, it was very evident, right? You're working with clients, they will immediately judge you because who's this new person trying to tell me what to do? And if you are someone who is respectful, who can present information without being condescending, who dresses well, who, you know, doesn't have any like visible flaws immediately, then it has a major impact on how like they can take in the information you give them. Which, you know, I had hoped that didn't matter as much, but there is a benefit to just being presentable. And I think that's a lot of what consulting firms index for too, but it just extends beyond consulting. Like, even in industry, like when I was at Tesla, there would be people who, you know, you would see like kind of flounder because they cannot communicate very clearly, or they, you know, for one reason or other, just did not appeal to a specific audience. So that has really changed over the course of my like 10 years, in the past 10 years. But it is something I focus on more now, just making sure that I come off as someone who is respectful, who is not condescending, who is like really treating people as well as I would treat myself.
Yeah, that is interesting, because I think there is a general sense of people saying like, oh, just be yourself. And like, also, especially in the tech world, you know, you wear like a hoodie and like, you know, all of that. But I think that is true, like, especially in the corporate world, especially in consulting and all over, that if you do pay attention to how you're presenting yourself to others, it does. Yeah, I'm just thinking about this myself, because I haven't really thought about this in a while. Of like, so like, for example, for interviews, or this podcast, like sometimes I think, oh, maybe I'll just wear a normal t-shirt. And other times I wear a button up. It's very random right now, but maybe I'm thinking right now, like, oh, maybe I should just wear a button up each time, you know? But last question I have for you is, if you could go back to your younger self, maybe 18-year-old Victor, what is something that you would tell him? And it could be personal or professional.
Yeah, I would tell my younger self, don't blindly follow a commitment. I think there's a lot of this expectation that as you go through school, as you go through your first job, that you don't really know what you're doing. you can't really think about those things critically because you haven't learned how to do that. And as a result, you blindly follow these rules, these expectations, like, oh, your first year as an associate, you need to work like your life depends on it. I didn't take a vacation my first year in consulting because I wanted to make sure I proved myself, because that's kind of just what I've been told. Those were the expectations, but it really took a toll. Engineering school, like I needed to get an engineering degree because I was told I was very good at science and math, and I was told I would do well and it would make me a lot of money and make me like very comfortable with my life. But it was an expectation imposed on me by like my parents, my teachers, even myself, without really knowing what I was getting myself into. So I think I would tell myself to just step back and think critically, like, is this really what you want to do? Is it really how you want to live your life? And in order to really get to that answer, you have to be a little bit more vulnerable too, and talk to people and open up and get their perspectives as well. Because I was also very bad at, being open with my issues with other people. I would be like, I can handle this myself. But I think really, in order to think critically about something, you can't just take things for granted and just follow it blindly. You have to really expose yourself to more information so that you can make an informed decision.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a great note to end this conversation on. And I did want to also thank you so much again for all your time, because I think a lot of people want to learn about your time at what it's like working at Tesla. And also you just provided so much great advice and insight in general. So yeah, thanks again, Victor.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Ben.
Awesome. All right, so that wraps up the interview with Victor. Hope you all enjoyed and learned a lot about Tesla and what it's like working at the company. I'd be interested in hearing what your guys' thoughts are if you're watching this on YouTube, to kind of get your take on what you learned in this interview, because I know Tesla can be a very controversial company. And so, or at least Elon Musk can be. And so feel free to leave any comments if you'd like. With that said, thank you guys all, as always, for tuning in. Hope to catch you all in the next episode. Thanks, guys, and peace out.